Hi guys, I wanted to create a quick tutorial to walk you through the directions for your persuasive speech. A majority of this time will be spent going over the graphic organizer and how to actually set up your speech. The first page that you're looking at below is the setup of directions that you'll actually find in Classroom. So everything that I'm showing you right now, minus the examples that you see that I wrote myself, can be found in Classroom in your directions. As a reminder, the essential question that's the driver for your persuasive speech is how can fear undermine Americans' opportunities? In this case, you're going to write from the perspective that fear can undermine Americans' opportunities, and it took away the opportunities of Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor. So, once again, all the directions are here. I would read through them, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me a quick email. Down at the bottom, there's a breakdown of your competency grades and points and extended parts of how it relates to the social studies rubrics. Once again, let me know if you have any questions. But where I want to spend the majority of my time is actually talking about how to complete the assignment. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your web activity that you've been working on for the past couple days, and you're going to formulate it into a brainstorming graphic organizer and then develop a speech. You have to complete both steps, both the graphic organizer and the actual speech. Some of you might try to skip this step. Please do not, because it is part of your grade. Step one, you're going to take the notes that you have from the web activity, and your job is think of it like a sifter. You're going to sift through all the information that you've collected, and you're going to find what you consider to be probably the three most important pieces of evidence that you believe would be the most influential in convincing the American public that fear undermined the rights of Japanese Americans during this time period. These pieces of evidence can be a quote, maybe from a narrative of an internee. Please make sure to name them as well. It can be a photograph that you explain clearly. It can be a summary of a fact. You find that information and you put the best three pieces here. What I will say to you is this: they need to be specified in detail. You cannot simply just say a random fact like Japanese had to give up their businesses. It's not strong enough. These pieces of evidence are going to serve as what you consider to be the most influential pieces of documentation that you have to prove to the American public and your classmates that your point is correct. Okay, so make sure you put 1, 2, and 3. List them here clearly. You do not need citations because it all comes from the web activity that I already have. Then you'll go on to step 2A and 2B of your graphic organizer. This corresponds with one another. 2A corresponds with 2B. 2A, consider this the point, and 2B is your counterpoint. So what you do in a persuasive speech that's a little different than normal writing is, in normal writing, you would just give your evidence and explain why it would convince a particular person to be your argument is correct. But in a persuasive speech, you actually need to address the other side's potential arguments and then explain to them why they're wrong. But instead of saying they're wrong, we're going to say that you're going to relieve their concerns. So for instance, for one, you might write, some Americans believed that Japanese Americans were a security risk and could potentially lead to helping Japan if they invaded the United States. That would be a concern, a point that I would put here. I would then go down to 1 and I would go through all the evidence that I collected in the web activity, and I would need to find an example of something that would counter that point. This cannot be my opinion. This has to be an actual fact that I found. So you cannot use the 3 pieces of evidence up here. You actually have to find new pieces of evidence that would support those counter arguments that you're trying to make. So 1 corresponds to 1, 2 corresponds to 2, and 3 corresponds to 3. Make sure you keep that in perspective. And once again, the 1, 2, and 3 statements will simply be what would Americans fear, and your 1, 2, and 3 and 2B will be pieces of evidence from the web activity to prove that statement inaccurate. Once you're done with that, you've actually finished the graphic organizer, and your job is to then transform it into a persuasive speech. The speech will be given in roundtable on Thursday in class, and each person will read over what their speech is. Consider this as a debate opening. In a debate opening, you are giving a persuasive argument as to why your side is correct. So the first thing you need to do is actually give the date, and then you need to do section 1 of the speech. Section 1 will explain your position, clearly giving your thesis statement. The very first thing you should do is give that question. How does fear undermine Americans' opportunities? You need to develop a clear thesis statement that says fear undermines American opportunities, and then finish the thought from there. Then you need to define how fear can be dangerous in regards to citizens' opportunities. Think back to the Monday activity that we did, where we actually talked about how fear can be dangerous. And I actually asked you that as a question. Feel free to use what you brainstormed on your paper as a driver to help you formulate this answer. This doesn't have to just be in general to the Japanese internment. It can be like an overarching thought about why fear can be dangerous in a broad term. Then you're going to get to the narrowing down. You need to give what I call an overview of Japanese internment and what it entailed. You need, in a speech, you have to tell the reader, give them some background information as to what you're talking about. This section is completely unbiased, and it really is about facts about this event. Facts would include the who, the what, the where, the cause, background to the registration, assembly centers, and permanent camps. You should be able to sum this up into 3 to 4 solid sentences. Now, that may not seem like a lot, but those 3 to 4 sentences need to be packed with facts from the information that you gained from the web activity. So make sure you do that. Explain what the registration was like. Talk about the assembly centers. Give detail to what the permanent camps entailed. Talk about the dates that it occurred. Where were the camps located? Talk about why FDR did it. Those are the things you should include in your overview. Once you've completed section 1, you'll then go on to section 2. And this is in correlation with your graphic organizer. So the 3 pieces of evidence that you put in step 1 are the 3 pieces of detail that you will talk about in section 2 of your speech. Remember, these arguments should be meaningful and they need to be put into a description that will convince the audience that you're correct. So what I did is I actually created an example that you see of a particular piece of information and how to put it into context. So one thing I said, one reason why Japanese internment undermined the opportunities of Americans was because this action was a violation of the 14th Amendment in the United States Constitution. The amendment states, no state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. This amendment actually came from the web activity, and I literally took the quote of the amendment and put it into my documentation. By putting the sentence before it, I'm putting it into context as to why I chose it, and then you'll notice the sentence afterwards is the rationale as to proving why my persuasion is correct. The interning of Japanese Americans, most of whom were citizens of the United States, clearly violated the 14th Amendment because they were deprived of liberty by being forced into the camps without cause or due process, and they were also deprived of property because they lost their homes, businesses, and personal possessions. So right there, I'm clearly explaining to my audience how the 14th Amendment proves, by violating this 14th Amendment, how this proves that Japanese Americans' rights were undermined. And by following this example, you cannot use this. I do not give you permission to, but you can use this model of create an introduction, give your piece of evidence, and then explain how it proves your point. Okay? So that's how to do section 2. And you'll have your 3 pieces of evidence that need this. Section 3 of the speech corresponds to your graphic organizer 2A and 2B. This is where you're doing your point counterpoint. This is where you're saying to the Americans, like, I know this is what you believe, but here's why you're incorrect. So here's an example. Some Americans during this time claimed that Japanese Americans were a security risk because they might give information about American bases to the country of Japan. This sentence would have come from 2A, and it would have been my one sentence. Then I would give my 2B fact to prove that it's incorrect. Yet, in December of 1943, the Nisei, or the American-born Japanese descendants, were reclassified for the draft, and 2,800 internees were drawn for service from 1944 to 45. There's my evidence. Now, I need to keep going though, because I have to tell my reader why they are incorrect. This leads to the question, how could the government allow citizens who were considered a security risk in the military for service and to fight in the front lines in the battles in the Pacific? And I might go on to say, these individuals, if they were such a security risk, could potentially turn on American soldiers and possibly kill them. Yet, the American government still found that they were eligible for the draft and made them go into service accordingly. So right there, I'm addressing the concerns with the Americans. I'm not telling them that they're wrong, but I'm saying, listen, this is what happened, and this is why it doesn't make sense. Okay? So keep that in consideration. The last section of your speech is what's called a call to action. This is where you politely tell the American public that they're wrong, your argument is logical and therefore correct. Use emotional words to build your case. And then finally, at the end, you need to thank the public for considering your request. So these are the steps you need to take for your speech. Good luck. And once again, let me know if you have any questions. All the best.